Hi, welcome to Clarity 2020. My name is Asia Hoe, and I'm a digital product designer based here in New York City. I work at an educational tech company called Newsella, and whether I'm at work or offline, I enjoy designing websites, software, and the occasional game with a variety of skills across design, illustration, writing, and code. But I really like to say that I design experiences. And why is that? All of us at this conference, sure, we design products, software, but ultimately we design systems. As software becomes more sophisticated, less visible, and more deeply integrated into our lives, it becomes increasingly clear that the medium of our work is somewhat inconsequential. The work is not in the pixels or the lines of code, but in the systems we build. It's in the thinking we do and ultimately facilitate. When it comes down to it, people use products, including tech, to augment their experiences, not to use a product. Therefore, our work is experiences. Whether we view the human condition through the lens of philosophy, psychology, or perhaps at a larger scale like sociology, we learn that experiences are the foundation of human consciousness. So philosophers think, therefore I am. Psychology, I feel, therefore I am. And sociology, we do, therefore we are. And so on and so forth. Our experiences are governed and interpreted through the lens of an intricate body of systems. Quite literally, as I live and breathe, my body is both composed of and running on systems. When I walked through the woods this morning, it occurred to me that even the earth itself is dependent on systems. We call that ecology. Systems are innate and perhaps even a force of nature. They exist with or without us. We saw this a little at the beginning of the pandemic when people started to rejoice about animals coming back. And in this way, systems are neutral, at least until we manipulate these systems with human intent. Now, the pandemic has been really fascinating to me in that it's exposed a lot of the deep inequities that run rampant in our larger system. And I've been thinking about that connection between experiences and systems in general. A great deal of what makes this pandemic so challenging for so many of us is that it has been the complete and utter disruption of the web of systems that are as small as personal routines and as large as the global economy. And when many of these systems began to shut down, our collective experiences over time grew to be worse. We gained some new perspective into the breaking points in the systems. So much of the human experience is bound up with the systems that run our lives. What I find most fascinating about quarantine is how it has exposed the inequalities underpinning virtually all the systems we've built, particularly here in the US. In a Clarity talk from 2019, my good friend Tatiana Mack said, tech is a multiplier, and that it multiplies building hate at scale. And we've seen this very clearly in 2020 with reactions to everything from the Black Lives Matter movement to pandemics and vaccines in general. And she then went on to explain how many of these systems we rely on today are inextricably linked to colonization and slavery, just to name a few systems. In 2020, these connections are overwhelmingly clear, and we're just beginning to do something about it and examine other ways of being. But where the seeds of inequality and hatred have been sown, we have seen our dependence on tech in this quarantine amplify these issues even further. People like to envision tech and the internet as great equalizers, not unlike the coronavirus. But similarly, they would be wrong. As with most things, we saw the pandemic impact the sick, old, and poor disproportionately. Without a foundation of inclusivity and equity to help us navigate the pandemic, we are forced to reckon with the reality of just how savage these inequalities are and the notion that these systems are operating exactly as they were designed. I'm reminded of my own naivety when it comes to the internet and education in particular. As I mentioned before, I work at Newzella, an educational tech company. Previously, I worked at 2U, another ed tech company at the collegiate level. And in general, I've specialized in design at the nexus of education and tech for the vast majority of my career. A lot of that inspiration to do so comes from my upbringing. I grew up believing that education was the great equalizer, that wits and hard work would suffice to help catapult me out of poverty. Given the first opportunity, after rigorous testing and interviewing, I left home to pursue a better education through the A Better Chance program. It was a program that was founded in 1963, just after desegregation. So there's a lot to unpack there alone. But I'll give you a little more background about the program. At 14, I was enrolled in a blue ribbon public school in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I was dependent on the generosity of dozens of volunteers across the school district and at A Better Chance's headquarters in New York City. The experience taught me what happens when a privileged few pool the resources together for the less fortunate. Communities all over the nation have committed to the program, expanding opportunities to disadvantaged youth since 1963. And for me, that meant I got to play lacrosse for the first time. I got to learn how to ice skate and rollerblade and do things that generally were not accessible to me in New York City public schools. While A Better Chance is no salve for the systemic issues that have continued to make the program a desirable experience for parents and students alike, it has proven a remarkable approach. However, it is not lost on me that it emerged as an experiment at the peak of the desegregation movement. That the program continues to exist is a testament to the fact that the inequality it was designed to address is no closer to solved than it was at its inception. But sometimes Band-Aids are necessary. Like A Better Chance, many companies stepped up and offered interim solutions for people most affected by the virus. For example, internet service providers offered trials to customers facing unemployment. Headspace and other wellness companies offered trials for meditation and fitness to keep people well at home. And my own employer, Newzella, temporarily made all of its products free, expanding the reach of our content to displaced teachers and students all over the country. While all of these things are a good example of companies doing the best they can to address the crisis, it's only just the beginning. Even our best intentions in the present can't displace the impact of the intentional and deliberate exclusion and destruction that has been both explicit and implicit in the systems we've designed as a society and as individuals. So how can we hope to not merely mitigate those experiences, but re-envision them for a better tomorrow? Well, the short answer is we do more. The pandemic has enforced a global retrospective, and we have a unique opportunity as a society and as a species to look at all of the social debt we have both tolerated and enabled and envision a better way of doing things moving forward. Whether we will take that opportunity remains to be seen, but I, for one, am encouraged. Still, we've got a long way to go. When I think about students returning to school in the fall, I'm reminded about the poor internet infrastructure in this country. And a lot of students, their only device is a smartphone or the public library or the computers in the lab at school. And with limited access to those devices, we've had to get clever at Newzella to address those issues. We saw an immediate uptick of mobile users on the platform, and our design system empowered us to address any flaws or concerns in responsive design and accessibility issues that were present on our site. So we're taking action through the lens of design systems to address the inequities in other systems. When we buy into the narrative that we have no control over our experiences, that we have no collective power, we resign ourselves to negative experiences. We design our collective experience with action. So whether it's voting, donating, mentoring, or volunteering, we all have the ability to design our world. This starts with taking responsibility. This starts with taking action. Thank you.
Hey, Asia.
Hey, Dan.
How are you doing?
I'm feeling pumped and jittery like I just downed a whole cup of coffee, but I didn't.
That adrenaline from that talk is well warranted. What a great talk.
Thank you.
A quick question for you. Why do you think that elevator jokes are so good?
Um, I don't know, but I'm down to find out.
It's because they work on so many levels. Yeah.
Great. I'll have to tweet that for you later.
Thank you. Thank you. Your talk was such an important talk. It is a talk that I think all of us need to hear. We need to be talking about more. Let's talk about some of the things that were in that talk. One of the things that you mentioned was about the school that you went to, and you mentioned that the reason that was possible was that a bunch of people were able to pool their resources together to be able to help others. Do you see other examples of how that's working in society today? Like, do you see that happening more? Is that something that we could be doing more? Like, what can you tell us about how to do that well?
Yeah, so I saw a lot of that actually during this pandemic. I saw people doing Cash App campaigns, GoFundMe campaigns, interesting takes on Patreon to leverage people's creative works. For instance, there was a great campaign by an artist who illustrated things to create funds for the USPS and for a variety of organizations related to Black Lives Matter. So that's some of the ways. It's harder to volunteer nowadays, but before the pandemic, the biggest way I saw people do this was through teaching. And that's clearly colored by my own bias because I am a frequent mentor. And I volunteer with organizations like All Stars Code, America on Tech, and a plethora of other organizations that teach people from disadvantaged backgrounds about technology, how to code, how to design, how to make games, and things of that nature. And those are great alternative after school programs that I've participated in. So between volunteering and actually actively moving funds around, those are the biggest ways I've seen people redistribute opportunity.
Yeah, I got you. You mentioned the extending trials to services, which I think is a great response from a lot of companies to help people and help kind of address some of those inequities. One of the things that it made me think, though, and I'd love to know if you think that this is accurate or maybe we can think about it in a different way, is that can't be scalable, right? Like, we can't expect companies to discount their services forever for people who are really suffering from events like a pandemic. What are some other things that you think organizations can do other than saying, okay, we're going to cut our rates temporarily, but at some point they have to go back to whatever their normal is in order to keep themselves in business to be able to keep providing value? Are there other things that companies can be doing like that are more sustainable?
Yeah, I'm starting to see this just now as a lot of companies readjust to their previous norms with some small changes. A lot of services responded and saw an influx of new users, new customers. And I think one of the biggest ways people make it more equitable is by teaching and training people how to use these products, because a lot of folks are jumping onto these platforms for the first time. The learning curve for Zoom, for example, was very painful, and I'm seeing some new companies form out of that void. And I'm really excited to see that entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well during this time. But to bring it a little closer to home, at Newsela, we're really investing in our Newsela Certified Educator program to help new teachers who got funding this school year to really pour into the technological side of things. And really learn how to use it more effectively, how to tackle the issues that come with distance learning. And I think training and making that more accessible is really going to help. And again, extended trials is not something that needs to end. It might mean rethinking our license structure, but I see companies experimenting there as well, extending things to educators and other vulnerable professionals.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't really think about it that way, that like, offering all of your services for free is unsustainable for an organization, but rethinking your pricing model, though, that's not, because that can be sustainable. do you have examples off the top of your head of companies that have kind of readdressed their pricing or even further than extended trials? Have you seen anything there?
I've seen companies like Notion and Loom extend their services to educators and students, things that previously weren't available, and now you can get with a educational email address, and they're not making most people jump through all these hoops to verify that, which is great because that can take months in a situation like a pandemic where we're already inundated with COVID response and things like that. So that's one way I've seen people do that. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other examples. But another thing I've seen is the community itself banding together to build funds for people who maybe can't afford certain software or maybe needs hardware. I've seen Comcast and other ISPs think about expanding their reach, not just for lower income communities, but for, again, students and teachers. And that's my lens, so I've focused there, but I'm sure other essential workers have seen some, I don't want to use the word perks, but some new opportunities spring up out of that as a result.
There's a good question in our Slido app from RV Mendoza, who says, what are some technical situations that you've come across that might multiply abuse? You mentioned that great quote from Tatiana about tech being a multiplier, and that's generally a positive thing, except when it doesn't work that way, when it multiplies abuse and hate and things like that. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that lead to that?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is that a lot of these social apps, that's really the biggest vector for a lot of hatred, is that they don't really have a global code of conduct. It's kind of like anything goes, all content is allowed here. So I actually had to take several hiatuses from Twitter this year because there was no clear direction about the rhetoric that is coming from the White House and how it was inciting violence and hatred. And we're just starting to see them make some attempts at curtailing that behavior. But there's so much more that needs to be done. And I think about other social platforms like Instagram and Twitch, which has been booming in this time. People are looking for new ways to connect with others, and streaming has been a huge one. And they've been dealing with some new vectors of hatred now that people pretty much have a lot of time on their hands. We've seen people do hate raids, which is where they come and say awful things, kind of similar to Zoom bombing that happened a lot. And so we've seen new security tools. We've seen new settings on dashboards that allow people to flag certain words. Again, these are people scrambling on product teams to figure this out in real time. And I think there are a lot of people who are working on best case scenarios for this. I'm having some trouble remembering one of the bigger voices in this, but a lot of these people are people I've observed in the gaming community who have been figuring this out because it has been a toxic environment for quite some time. And that's the technological community or sub-community that I've been watching closely because they seem to be most invested right now in fixing that problem. Because if you're playing a game where you're supposed to be having fun and you're inundated with, hatred, you're not going to want to participate, and that hurts everyone. So that's a space to watch. Absolutely.
This is a bit of a big question, so I don't imagine that there would be an answer to this, but maybe we could start the conversation about it, which is that there's a lot of conversation about the fact that our systems are broken, and in your talk you point out that it's not that. The systems are working exactly as they were designed to work. They're not broken; they are succeeding, to the most degree. How do we start to address that? Even, how do we start to dismantle those systems that allow for the hatred and the multiplication and all of that stuff? How do we even begin to think about a problem as big as that?
Yeah, that is a very, very large question. And it's one I've been thinking about a lot in relation to things like policing, education, and even the way we run our governments. I've been thinking a lot about Medicare for all. And I think dismantlement, it's not a word, dismantling is one approach. And another is to just,
start from scratch. And I know that's really radical to say, but I think there's a hunger for that right now, at least in the US. And I'm seeing signs of it in other countries as well. Like the old ways are not working. Maybe some of the old ways before colonialism really worked. And so we're thinking about how do we revisit that and get closer to solutions that are better for everyone. And I realize that that's a lot and it's really hard to ponder. But being in this technological space, I'm always thinking about ways to innovate and kind of say, let's ignore everything else that exists in this problem space. Let's go to the heart of the matter, the people who use these things, and figure out what would this look like if we had like a pie in the sky view of it. What would this look like, as opposed to approaching it from here's everything wrong, let's fix it. And while you do run some risk of repeating some of those same problems, I think it does help you to be a little more open-ended and open-minded and kind of experiment. Because I think the mindset of dismantling is largely a negative one, in that you have to deal with the exhausting process of pointing out all the bad things to avoid. And I think people in general are more responsive to positive spins on things. So I've been trying to think about that, even like with personal stuff, like my own routines, my own little systems. Like, how do I figure out a positive way, the ideal, and run for that instead of trying to correct and mold something that is laden with debt?
And I'm supposed to be asking you some questions. Can I share a quick story here?
Absolutely.
So I taught a design systems class last term at Drexel, which is a university in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. And I had 8 seniors in my class. And it was great. It was a nuts and bolts class about design systems. And at the end of the class, they all built their design system. They use it in multiple products. And I said, for the last class, we're going to have kind of an easy class, right? It was a morning class. I said, like, you all should celebrate. You did your final projects, bring mimosas, and, we'll hang out and we'll just have a light class. That was the week that George Floyd was murdered, earlier in that week before our class. And so it felt irresponsible to me to say, like, we'll just have a light class. We just talked about systems for the last 9 weeks. And so I felt that we had to have a conversation about what happens when systems break or when they fail, and also when they succeed as intended. And so we had a really poignant conversation at the end of that class about how now these students, these graduating seniors from a university, they now know how to work with a system, how to create one from scratch, how to work within one, how to use other people's systems, and like how to be able to discern. The first assignment in that class was like, go grab material design or lightning and try to build something with that, right? So like, you know how to use an existing system, and now you don't, and now you know how to create one of your own. So now you can kind of weigh the pros and cons. You mentioned in your talk, we need to take action through design systems to address some of these inequities. What do we as design systems professionals, we know how to make components and how to build NPM packages and things like that. A lot of those skills seem transferable to larger problems of systems at scale. What are some practical, actionable things that, if I'm an engineer or I'm a product manager, or I'm a designer or a QA or a content person, are there things that we can do in our design system knowledge to address the systems that exist in our society?
Absolutely. And I really love that you shared that story. Like, it just inspires me so much. And I'm like, I want to take that class. But I think a lot about the fact that many design programs are still, lagging behind in terms of teaching our students about ethics and engineering as well. That's still a very new part of the discipline, and it often is treated more like a elective as opposed to a requirement. But even in this field, without that training, I think a lot of us in learning about empathy and inclusivity are starting to see just how transferable these skills are. I saw people creating beautiful graphics on Instagram, lots of designers and poets using their skills to communicate about these systems. There's a example on Instagram. It's like, so you want to talk about, etc. It might be, they talked about policing. They talked about the 3 branches of government. They talked about the history of lynching and et cetera. And they use the lens of design and technology to figure that out. And I think because we're in this situation, in this pandemic, that almost becomes more important because that's our lifeline right now. So we need to be able to build new products and new systems to address these things and work around a lot of those challenges that we're seeing. And product managers are very interesting because in a lot of ways, they help direct that energy. And I think a lot of us as individual designers and engineers kind of struggle with that. We're like, I just want to do something, anything. So collaboration is key at this time as well. And I'm happy to see people starting to do this. I'm creating new communities towards the movement as opposed to towards a product or profit. And that's really encouraging. I'm excited to see new technology companies that are focused not on tech per se, but on ideas and systems and beliefs. Like I'm reminded of when Hillary Clinton had her campaign here in New York, they took an approach that was eerily similar to a lot of tech companies. There was a lot of Scrum. There was a lot of there was product managers and UX designers and everything, the whole board. And I would love to see that more and more at our government level. I see people like Ocasio-Cortez using skills that most of us take for granted to do these same things to make sure that the people and the public have access. And even just rudimentary skills like responsive web design and just making a simple web page can go a long way. Our skills in marketing, you don't have to be all that technical to get involved. All of these things have tremendous impact, and that's something I've embraced in this time. Like I'm not just a designer and who knows a little bit of front end, I also write. And that is the baseline level of like how I can, make change happen. So.
Yeah, awesome. I have one or two more questions that are kind of coming in from the chat and then we'll kind of wrap it up. A. Burton asked, like, can we as a community build an open source design system dedicated to social justice and abolition? Kind of been thinking about what we can do in our craft to help. Have you seen initiatives like that exist? Are there pros and cons to doing that? Because I think, as you mentioned, a lot of people are like, I have these skills, I want to do something to help. What can I do though? And while a lot of those have good intentions, sometimes there are some negative ramifications of those as well. What have you seen that has worked well? And have you seen things that actually have worked poorly despite good intentions?
Yeah, I'm glad someone brought that up. I haven't seen anything yet that wants to tackle that head on. Like I've seen repositories of illustrations and code and things of that nature to help address these issues. But what I'm not seeing is people creating entire design systems, and that's a really compelling idea. The ability to build platforms for nonprofits to get their word out, for social justice campaigns. I feel like there's already a lot of services out there that people hook onto, and the distraction comes from the profit margins. And I would absolutely encourage the community to look at that. But it's worth looking at some of the other open source experiences that have been had. It's another place where, unfortunately, there's some abuse, but again, the tools around managing that are getting better. I was previously involved with a mental health website called ifme.org. There might be a dash in there somewhere. And we had all kinds of contributors, from designers to engineers to content writers, therapists even. And that's an example, I think, the closest I can think of people coming together to build something that benefits the larger community. And they're doing really good work, especially right now in a time when a lot of us are starting to really understand like how important and valuable our mental health is. So that's an example I've seen, and they've managed the social abuse angle really well, I think, because they do still go through the interview process before allowing new contributors. They still meet. It's not just this repository online that folks contribute to without a name and a face. And that was a really encouraging experience that I might look at revisiting now that it's come to my mind again. But yes, I think that's absolutely worth looking at. I've seen some designers start to put educational tools online because there's been a lot of momentum of folks moving out of previous careers to pursue something that's more stable, and that's tech right now. So getting out there and sharing like what you know, whether that's through a YouTube channel. I pray that blogs come back because I'm personally not a huge fan of watching to learn. I consume better when I can read and highlight and mark up. And I love that people are starting to share these things and make them more accessible and not through profit. I've seen a lot of mental health resources that are pay what you can model, which is brave. But yeah, there's lots of ways to tackle this, and open source is absolutely an excellent way to do it.
Awesome. Well, last question here, kind of on a personal note related to that. Jay asks in Slido, what future projects are you working on in EdTech? You mentioned education being a really important component of this. So what are you working on in EdTech? And specifically, are there mental breaks incorporated in the platform for kids and educators? What have you seen there, and what are you working on?
So at Newsela right now, I am working on Newsela's design system. I'm also working on our backend CMS, which has some really interesting impacts on what we can do with the content on the platform. And when you talk about mental breaks, that's not something we really considered. For those of you that don't know, Newsela is a company that basically takes news articles and levels them according to a Lexile system, which looks at the vocabulary and the context and content of an article. And then we take that and provide multiple grade levels, which then a student can choose, I'm struggling here at this point, let me lower it, or this is easy, let me go up a level. Or teachers can also move to lock in a level if they want students performing at a certain level. Because, sometimes kids are like, I want to do the easy thing. So that is something, the closest thing we've done to mental breaks. But we also try to include content that is, good news. We literally have a category that is about good news. It might be about students who have done empowering things in the community. It might be about games. We have some pieces that are from student voices, and they'll write an opinion-based thing. And that gives teachers a great way to say, look, one of your peers thinks this way about this. What do you think? So different ways of tackling the issues. Like, it'd be a lot to sit students online or in a classroom and say, hey, let's talk about Trump and COVID and all these really difficult things that are happening to you right now. And we need to find those moments of levity. And I'm really glad that the content team has been able to do that, because that's all part of the experience too. How does this content make people feel, and do they have a way to work around it if it is negative? So that's what I'm working on. And then personally, I have a few ideas, which is I'm slowly working through prioritizing them. And I've been getting a lot of inquiries from people who are going to design or code boot camps who want to know, like, how do I make it in this industry? How do I succeed? And while this is a different world than I came up into this profession, I still have a lot that I want to teach people, but I want to make it sustainable. So I'm thinking about creating a resource on my website to help people who are transitioning to those new careers, help them find new ways to, organize and learn from people who are a few levels. And there are other organizations that do this, like Out of Office Hours came back this year, and that's been helpful. Hexagon UX is working on how to tackle mentoring online. And yeah, I want to create content that is accessible to folks, because we need more designers, we need more engineers, and this only works if they can talk to people that have that experience. So yeah, building new content. I'd love to get back into some open source projects, and yeah, who knows? I might even get back on Twitch or YouTube, and start teaching people and working on things live. I think that has been really valuable, even for me, seeing people work on everything from games to crochet to, painting. It's been really interesting as a new vehicle to learn. So, yeah.
That is awesome and exciting. And if I'm judging by the energy in the chat, there are lots of people who would love to see that stuff from you and would love to collaborate with you on all that stuff. So please let us all know when you do any of those things. I'm sure everyone will be following along. Thank you so much for that great talk. What a great topic. What a good conversation. It was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan.